he reestablishes himself in Phoenix, Arizona, and he starts the Church of Scientology. And that's the first place where the organization really got going. And he's developing new procedures. And he gets in bad, of course, with the people in Phoenix eventually. And he skips town like he always does. And he ends up in Washington, D.C. And there is where they start what is called the founding church, even though they really officially started in Phoenix. He relocates to Washington, D.C. He's got aspirations of getting involved in government. Not himself, but like creating safe ties with the government so that they'll have legal protection. And he's already becoming a religion and incorporated, and he has tax exemption. So now his claims about healing fall under claims of faith and not science. So he can kind of get away with making these claims and not having the FDA come after him. In the same way that, spiritual televangelists can heal you. And the FDA doesn't show up and say, hey, Bub, stop practicing medicine without a license, right? They get a pass on that stuff. Well, so does Hubbard at this point. So he can continue over-promising and under-delivering. And as long as the rubes keep coming in and giving him the money, and he's setting up this very structured sort of path to enlightenment now. It's very loosey-goosey still. I should say the structure really comes in the 60s. But the genesis of it is all through the 1950s. And he is now traveling around. He does twice yearly congresses. He does what's called advanced clinical courses. And he's building up city by city, area by area. He starts new organizations. All the old Dianetics foundations had all shut down by this point, or had converted into churches of Scientology. And he was encouraging especially during 54, 55, that the ministers wear ministerial robes, and this is where the Christian symbology comes in, where they come up with the cross. They have an 8-pointed cross in Scientology, and the idea of ceremonies. He writes a marriage ceremony. He writes a funeral ceremony. He comes up with all this stuff. He writes a creed for the church because you have to have that to apply for tax exemption. And it's all very religious sounding. And he bases it all on sort of Christian-based ideas. But he's also bringing Crowley symbology and thinking into this. And the Golden Dawn, for example, is one example of that. And there are others. With the symbology, like the cross that he adopts, the 8-pointed cross is a rosy cross. It's a Rosicrucian cross, which was used in the OTO, which was Crowley's thing. So there's these ties to it, but unless you're familiar with the occult, you wouldn't recognize that, right? And these people who were following Hubbard didn't have a clue about the occult. That's not who these people were. So they didn't know that Hubbard was just drawing left, right, and center from all these different subjects and sort of making this new medley called the Church of Scientology. But he was really going to town on the religion angle at this point. And this is where we should probably mention that in the past, Hubbard was quoted by 3 sources that we know of. I think at least 3, definitely at least 3, that if you really want to make money, you start a religion.
Right. Yeah, that's the famous quote. And because it number one, it legally protects you from any scrutiny that any other business or corporation or mental health, whatever, would be under. It saves you from any of that scrutiny and legal oversight. And then it allows you to go into the realm of sort of the unfalsifiable claims that are so fantastic that it captures people's imagination to the point where they're willing to give their lives to it because the claims are so fantastic.
Exactly. And that's the organization that Hubbard starts building. And I have to note here, just this is my own conjecture, but I believe based on everything that I've learned and read over the years and talking to so many people who actually, even some people who were around during this time, I've gone as far back as that in a couple cases. Mary Sue, his third and final wife, was crucial to this whole thing. Because remember, I said that Hubbard couldn't organize his way out of a wet paper bag. He was very, very bad at organizational skill and ability. And his ability to control his finances was very, very poor as well, until he met Mary Sue.
Mm.
And after that point, after he marries her and he gets her pregnant and they immediately are having kids, I think they ended up having 4 or 5. There's an abrupt change where Hubbard suddenly now is not tearing apart the organizations he's building as fast as he's building them. And I think that was Mary Sue's influence. And that's my conjecture. And I freely say that. But regardless, once he was hooked up with her, the organization started becoming more stable. And this started in Phoenix, then DC, and then eventually they moved at the end of the 1950s to England. They actually left the country entirely. And he set up shop in East Sussex, East Grinstead in Sussex, England, and at a property called St. Hill Manor. So all through the 1950s, he's sort of forming up these organizations. There's churches now in Seattle, Hawaii, Los Angeles, and I think there were, London. I think he opened up England also in 1952. And he went over there and gave some lectures. And he was just constantly traveling around lecturing to people. And he was writing books. He was, again, the guy was prolific. He was a writer and he could write. What he was writing wasn't so great, but the fact that he could sit down and pound out a book in a very short period of time was a skill that the guy had. And he started pounding out books. You have Fundamentals of Thought. You have New Slant on Life, you have Problems of Work, you have a bunch of books that come out during this time period. And they're sort of foundational books and ways that he thought he could take the principles that he had been developing and maybe apply them to work situations or to life situations where it would draw people in and get them more interested in the subject of Scientology and get them in and paying for auditing and for classes. Because at this point, and really starting back in 1950, they were not only selling the ideas and the books that Hubbard was writing, but they were selling classes in how to become trained as an auditor so that you could audit other people the same way Hubbard did. And they were selling e-meters. They were producing them and selling them. And Volney Matheson was making money. Hubbard was making money. The organizations that were forming were paying Hubbard, I think, 10% of their income, like every other week or something. So he was now riding a cash train, and he was making money and real money. And he was making a family, and he was actually building a life that was for the first time in his whole life, was actually kind of a stable sort of life. Even though he was traveling all over the place, he was having kids and all the rest. Okay, and he and Mary Sue are running this whole organization. And if you want to see what that dynamic actually looked like in real life, the best thing I could recommend to you is to watch a movie called The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah, with who's the actor who's passed away?
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
It's a brilliant, and I was always not sure. I knew that was at least loosely based on the life of L. Ron Hubbard, but it wasn't. He wasn't playing L. Ron Hubbard, so I wasn't sure how explicit that was.
It was exactly L. Ron Hubbard.
He wasn't called L. Ron Hubbard in the movie, right?
No, he wasn't. He was Lancaster Dodd was the name of the character.
But he's like typing on a typewriter on a boat, and you're like, this is obviously him, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was him. The sequences are different enough that you cannot really say, you wouldn't be able to take Paul Thomas Anderson to court and sue him for, appropriating L. Ron Hubbard and his life story, because they made enough changes that it's not him. But that's why I said that if you want to see the dynamic between Hubbard and his wife, who's played by Amy Adams in the movie, and how she dealt with things and how Hubbard dealt with things and how they treated their followers and how Hubbard would come out and do lectures, they nailed it. I mean, nailed it. Paul Thomas Anderson is the one guy who has never been connected with Scientology who has truly understood what I think Hubbard was actually like and what Mary Sue was kind of like too.